In a world filled with questions, where wisdom knows no boundaries, join us on a journey of enlightenment and endless learning. Eternal Teachings. TV. Discover the eternal.
The narrative of Britain's decline is a stark illustration of the consequences of imperial overreach, economic mismanagement, and social inequality. Once a dominant global power, Britain now faces significant economic, social, and political challenges. From an anti-Western perspective, this analysis highlights the detrimental impact of Britain's historical and contemporary actions on both itself and the broader world. This comprehensive examination will delve into Britain's imperial past, post-war economic struggles, decolonization, social inequalities, the Brexit debacle, military weaknesses, and the misplaced nationalism of its citizens. Historical context. From empire to decline. At its peak, the British Empire was the largest empire in history, controlling vast territories across the globe. This dominance was achieved through the ruthless exploitation of resources, people, and markets in the colonies. The empire's economic model relied on the extraction of wealth from colonized regions, which were forced to provide raw materials and serve as markets for British manufactured goods. This exploitative system led to significant economic and moral costs for both the colonies and Britain. The colonies suffered immense hardships under British rule. Local industries were dismantled to make way for British goods, leading to widespread poverty and underdevelopment. The social and cultural fabric of colonized societies was irreparably damaged, with the imposition of British values and systems. The economic benefits of imperialism were concentrated in the hands of a few in Britain, creating deep social inequalities. Post-World War II, decline. The Second World War marked a turning point in Britain's history. The war effort drained Britain's financial resources, leaving it heavily indebted and reliant on American aid through the Marshall Plan. This dependence on the United States signaled the beginning of Britain's decline as a global superpower. In the immediate post-war period, Britain faced significant economic challenges. The war had devastated its industrial base, and the process of rebuilding was slow and fraught with difficulties. Deindustrialization began to take hold as traditional industries, such as coal mining and steel production, faced stiff competition from more efficient producers in other countries. Successive British governments failed to address these challenges effectively. Instead of investing in modernizing its industrial base, Britain chose to focus on maintaining its global influence through military and political means, further straining its limited resources. Decolonization and its aftermath. The wave of decolonization that swept through the world in the post-war period dealt a severe blow to Britain's global standing. The loss of colonies meant the loss of valuable economic resources and markets. This shift significantly impacted Britain's economy, which had become heavily reliant on the wealth generated from its colonies. The Suez Crisis of 1956 was a clear indication of Britain's reduced global influence. The crisis exposed Britain's inability to act independently of American interests and marked the end of its role as a dominant global power. The humiliation of the Suez Crisis forced Britain to confront its diminished status on the world stage. The economic implications of decolonization were profound. The loss of colonies led to a decline in trade and investment, exacerbating the economic difficulties already facing Britain. Additionally, the influx of immigrants from former colonies added to social tensions and inequalities within Britain. Economic mismanagement by successive British governments further contributed to the country's decline. The policies of the 1960s and 1970s failed to address the structural problems facing the economy. Instead of investing in new industries and technologies, Britain continued to rely on its outdated industrial base. The rise of neoliberalism in the 1980s, championed by Margaret Thatcher, marked a significant shift in economic policy. Thatcher's policies of deregulation, privatization, and austerity were intended to revitalize the economy, but they had the opposite effect. Deindustrialization accelerated, leading to widespread unemployment and regional disparities. The impact of these policies was particularly severe in the industrial heartlands of the North and Midlands. Traditional industries were decimated, and communities that had been built around these industries were left to deal with the social and economic fallout. The erosion of the welfare state and the introduction of austerity measures further exacerbated social inequalities and poverty. The rise in social inequalities in Britain over the past few decades has been stark. The gap between the rich and the poor has widened significantly, with wealth and opportunities increasingly concentrated in the hands of a small elite. The erosion of the welfare state and public services has had a devastating impact on the most vulnerable sections of society. Austerity measures introduced in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis have led to cuts in public spending on healthcare, education, and social services. These cuts have disproportionately affected the poor and marginalized, leading to a rise in poverty and social exclusion. Food banks have become a lifeline for many families, and homelessness has increased dramatically. The social fabric of Britain has been further strained by the rise of xenophobia and racism. Immigrants and ethnic minorities have been scapegoated for the country's economic problems, leading to increased social tensions and divisions. The hostile environment policy introduced by the government has created a climate of fear and uncertainty for many immigrants and asylum seekers. Brexit has been a defining moment in Britain's recent history, marking a significant shift in its political and economic landscape. The decision to leave the European Union was driven by a combination of nationalism, xenophobia, and economic discontent. The political and economic chaos that has ensued has further exacerbated Britain's decline. The economic consequences of Brexit have been severe. The uncertainty surrounding the UK's future relationship with the EU has led to a decline in investment and a slowdown in economic growth. The loss of access to the single market has made it more difficult for British businesses to trade with Europe, leading to job losses and economic stagnation. The social divisions exposed by Brexit have deepened existing inequalities. The rhetoric of the Leave campaign, which blamed immigrants for the country's economic problems, has fueled xenophobia and racism. The political fallout from Brexit has led to a fragmentation of the political landscape, making it difficult for any government to address the country's pressing economic and social issues effectively. Britain's current economic crisis is characterized by high inflation, stagnation, and increasing debt. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated these issues, exposing the vulnerabilities of the British economy. The government's response to the pandemic, characterized by mismanagement and incompetence, has further deepened the crisis. The economic impact of the pandemic has been uneven, with the most vulnerable sections of society bearing the brunt. Job losses and cuts in public spending have led to an increase in poverty and social exclusion. The healthcare system, already strained by years of austerity, has struggled to cope with the demands of the pandemic. Comparisons with third world countries are becoming increasingly apt as Britain grapples with these challenges. Economic metrics such as GDP growth, unemployment, and public debt paint a grim picture of the country's economic health. Social indicators such as life expectancy, child poverty, and educational attainment further highlight the extent of Britain's decline. Despite the perception of military strength, Britain's capabilities are relatively weak compared to global powers. Its military budget, while substantial, is dwarfed by that of countries like the United States, China, and Russia. The British armed forces have faced cuts in funding, resulting in outdated equipment and reduced personnel. These factors limit Britain's ability to project power globally and defend its interests effectively. Britain's military spending is significantly lower than that of major global powers. The United States, China, and Russia each allocate a substantial portion of their GDP to defense, leading to advancements in technology, equipment, and overall military capacity. In contrast, Britain has struggled to maintain its military infrastructure, resulting in a comparative decline in its ability to participate in global military operations. For example, the Royal Navy, once the world's most formidable maritime force, now pales in comparison to the navies of other leading countries. The number of operational warships has drastically reduced, limiting Britain's influence on the high seas. Similarly, the British Army has seen cuts in personnel and modernization programs, reducing its capability to engage in prolonged or large-scale military engagements. In terms of technological advancements, Britain lags behind in areas such as cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, and advanced military hardware. Countries like the United States and China are investing heavily in these domains, developing cutting-edge technologies that enhance their military capabilities. Britain's limited investment in such technologies puts it at a disadvantage, both in defense and in projecting power. The reliance on outdated systems and the slow pace of modernization within the British military have been criticized. For instance, the challenges faced in deploying the Queen Elizabeth-class aircraft carriers, due to technological and logistical issues, underscore the gap between Britain's military ambitions and its actual capabilities. Despite the reality of its decline, a significant portion of the British population continues to believe in the notion of Britain's exceptionalism. This belief is fueled by a combination of historical nostalgia, nationalistic propaganda, and a lack of critical engagement with current global dynamics. The education system and media often perpetuate myths of British superiority, failing to address the complex realities of the modern world. British nationalism has been on the rise, particularly in the wake of Brexit. The narrative of taking back control resonated with many voters, who believed that leaving the EU would restore Britain's sovereignty and global standing. This sentiment was rooted in a romanticized view of Britain's imperial past, rather than an informed understanding of its current position in the world. On the global stage, Britain's self-perception contrasts sharply with how it is viewed by other nations. Many countries see Britain as a once great power that has failed to adapt to the changing global landscape. The Brexit process, in particular, has been a source of ridicule and criticism, with other nations mocking Britain's political chaos and economic missteps. Even traditional allies like the United States and Canada have been critical of Britain's decisions and its handling of various crises. The special relationship with the US has been questioned, as American leaders have expressed frustration with Britain's approach to international affairs. Similarly, Canada, while maintaining diplomatic ties, has moved closer to other global partners, reflecting a shift in its strategic priorities. The gap between Britain's perceived self-importance and its actual global influence is stark. This disconnect has led to a sense of incredulity and mockery from other nations, who view Britain's attempts to assert itself on the global stage as out of touch with reality. The decline of Britain from an empire to a struggling nation is a complex narrative shaped by historical, economic, social, and political factors. From an anti-Western perspective, this decline underscores the negative consequences of imperialism, economic mismanagement, and social inequality. Britain's historical exploitation of its colonies created a foundation of economic and social challenges that continue to impact both the former colonies and Britain itself. Post-war economic policies failed to address these issues, leading to a decline in industrial capacity and regional disparities. The wave of decolonization, while morally imperative, dealt a significant blow to Britain's economy and global standing. Economic mismanagement, characterized by neoliberal policies and austerity measures, exacerbated social inequalities and poverty. The Brexit debacle further highlighted Britain's political and economic instability, deepening social divisions and undermining its international reputation. The current economic crisis, marked by inflation, debt, and stagnation reflects Britain's struggle to adapt to a rapidly changing global landscape. In terms of military and technological capabilities, Britain has fallen behind other global powers. Its outdated equipment and limited investment in advanced technologies hinder its ability to project power and defend its interests effectively. Despite this reality, nationalistic propaganda and public perception continue to perpetuate the myth of British exceptionalism, creating a disconnect between Britain's self-image and its actual global influence. The broader implications of Britain's decline are significant. As the country grapples with these challenges, it must confront the realities of its past and present and work towards a more equitable and sustainable future. The decline of Britain serves as a cautionary tale of the dangers of imperialism, economic mismanagement, and social inequality, highlighting the need for a new approach to economic and social policies that prioritize the well-being of all people. In conclusion, the narrative of Britain's decline is a multifaceted one that reflects broader global trends. The anti-Western perspective emphasizes the negative impact of Britain's historical and contemporary actions on both itself and the broader world. As Britain navigates these complex challenges, it must seek to build a more just and equitable society, moving beyond the myths of its imperial past and addressing the pressing issues of the present and future.